We here at the Sports History Network proudly partner with 26 podcasts, all revolving around the history of sports. But did you know that many of our hosts were sports history authors way before they started their shows? It's true. We've got Joe Ziemba, host of When Football Was Football, Joe Zagurski, host of Pro Football in the 1970s, Mark Morthier, host of Yesterday's Sports, Tommy Phillips, host of Lombardi Memories, and Scott Adamson, co-host of From the 55-Yard Line. All these authors have many books for you to choose from. To check them out, go to our website at sportshistorynetwork.com/sportshistorybooks. Pick up your copy today. Soundtrack provided by Kevin MacLeod of filmmusic.io.
This podcast is part of the Sports History Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sport. You can learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com.
Hello again, I'm John Gidley, and welcome to another trip into the football attic. If you were with me last time, you'll remember that we talked about some pretty great football, a 1969 game between the 10-1 Vikings and the 11-0 Rams. Well, today we're going to balance things out and talk about one, or make that two, of the worst football teams ever to take the field. Those were the Houston Oilers of 1972 and 73. First, a little backstory. In case you don't know, the Houston Oilers are currently the Tennessee Titans. The Oilers were founded by Bud Adams as a charter member of the American Football League, the upstart AFL, in 1960, and they played 36 years in Houston before moving to Tennessee in 1997. At first, the nickname didn't change, and they were called the Tennessee Oilers, but after 2 seasons, everyone realized that oil isn't equated with Tennessee like it is with Texas, so in 1999, the nickname of Titans was adopted. Now, I've always found the Houston Oilers to be a fascinating case because it always seemed like they were at either extreme in terms of their level of play. In other words, they were rarely mediocre. Either they were really good or really, really bad. In their first 3 seasons in the AFL from 1960 to 62, the Oilers went 31-8-1 and won each of the first 2 AFL championships. That was their first great era. The second was from 1978 to 1980, the period in which Oiler fans adopted the slogan, "Love Ya Blue." They were coached by Bum Phillips, and their star player was running back Earl Campbell. In those 3 seasons, Campbell averaged almost 1,800 rushing yards and 16 touchdowns per season. He was unstoppable in this time period. They went to the playoffs in each of those 3 seasons, but came up short each time, most notably losing to their arch-rival Pittsburgh in back-to-back AFC championship games. The third great era of Oilers football was from 1987 to 1993, when they were led by quarterback Warren Moon and implemented an offense known as the run and shoot. They made the playoffs in each of those 7 seasons, but never made it past the AFC divisional round. In these eras, it was great to be a fan of the Houston Oilers, though it always meant heartbreak come January. Now, to match those 3 great eras, there were 3 dreadful time periods. One of them was from 1982 to 84. Mercifully for Houston, the 1982 regular season was cut in half by a players' strike. Otherwise, they may have been remembered as one of the worst teams ever. In those 3 seasons, the Oilers' combined record was 6-35. They also went 5-11 in both 1985 and 86, which isn't good, but it wasn't as dreadful as those teams from 82 to 84. Fast forward to 1994, when the Oilers' leader, Warren Moon, was traded to Minnesota. This was basically the end of the Houston Oilers. After going 12-4 in 1993, they bottomed out by going 2-14 in 94. Their final 2 seasons in Houston were mediocre. They went 7-9 in 1995 and 8-8 in 96, but the fan base became extremely apathetic due to both an uninspiring team and swirling rumors that the Oilers would soon be leaving for Tennessee. In 1996, their final season in Houston, the average attendance for home games at the Astrodome was just under 32,000. Compare that to the average crowds of between 55 and 60,000 they were drawing just a few seasons before, and that's a pretty steep drop. The final home game in Houston Oilers franchise history, a 21-13 loss to the Cincinnati Bengals on December 15, 1996, drew only 15,131 fans, a sad ending for this star-crossed franchise. As bad as both of those aforementioned eras are, however, no Houston Oilers teams were ever worse than the 2 that took the field in 1972 and 73. Both of those teams finished the regular season with 1 win and 13 losses. The Oilers had been slipping prior to this. They went 3-10-1 in 1970 and 4-9-1 in 71, but 72 and 73 were when the bottom completely dropped out. It all began in the 1972 offseason when the Oilers hired Bill Peterson to be their head coach. Prior to this, Peterson had absolutely no experience in the NFL, either as a coach or a player. He spent 5 years coaching high school football in Ohio, then 4 years as an assistant coach at LSU, before taking the head coaching job at Florida State in 1960. Long before Bobby Bowden, Bill Peterson was the one who put Florida State football on the map. He coached the Seminoles for 11 seasons and left with a career record of 62, 42, and 11. For just one season in 1971, he coached the Rice University football team, also in Houston, going only 3-7-1 before leaving to take the Oilers job. Now, you could argue that it wasn't entirely Peterson's fault, having inherited one of the worst rosters in the league. At the same time, however, players and reporters both recall that he seemed intimidated by the NFL and never really had either his words or his bearings straight. He once told the players to stand on their helmets with the sideline under their arms as the national anthem was played. Another time, he perplexed the team by calling for a punt on 3rd down. In 1972, the Oilers ranked second to last in the NFL in both points scored and points allowed. The average final score of an Oilers game that year was 27-12, in favor of the other team, of course. The most points they scored in 72 were 26, in their only victory of the season, a 26-20 win over the Jets in Week 3. The next week, the Oilers hosted the Oakland Raiders on Monday Night Football and were humiliated in front of a national audience. Quarterback Dan Pastorini completed only 3 passes on 21 attempts with 31 passing yards and 4 interceptions, one more interception than completed pass. Houston gained only 89 total yards in a 34-0 defeat. Towards the end of the game, the ABC cameras began to pan the near-empty Astrodome. They zeroed in on a fan who was sleeping. When he woke up, he realized he was on camera and gave the middle finger. This caused announcers Frank Gifford, Howard Cosell, and Don Meredith to crack up, with Meredith quipping, "They're number 1 in the nation." This was one of 2 instances that season in which the Oilers laid a goose egg. 4 weeks later, they were shut out by the Browns in Cleveland 20-0. The next week, they lost 18-17 at home to the equally embarrassing Philadelphia Eagles. All of the Eagles' points came on 6 Tom Dempsey field goals. The 1972 Oilers season was put out of its misery on December 17th with a 61-17 defeat at home to Cincinnati. As I perused Houston's final statistics for the season, I noticed that all of their running backs, along with a few quarterbacks and receivers, combined for only 1,518 rushing yards and 7 touchdowns. That's among 11 players. That's typically the stat line for one good running back. This is 11 players that we're talking about. For comparison, the defense allowed almost 2,600 rushing yards and 23 rushing touchdowns. Now, normally, when you win only one game all season, you're bound to improve the next year. But there was nothing normal about these Houston Oilers. They were about the same as the 2017 Browns, who went 1-15 in 2016, then went 0-16 the next year. After an 0-5 start in 1973, Bill Peterson was fired as head coach and replaced by Sid Gilman, who had previously won an AFL championship with the San Diego Chargers. Gilman wasn't much of an improvement, as the Oilers still won only one game all season. That was a 31-27 victory at the Baltimore Colts on November 4th. The offense was just as bad as it was in 72, but the defense was somehow even worse, allowing an average of 32 points per game. Over a 5-week stretch from late September to late October, Houston gave up 192 points in 5 games. That's an average of 38 points per those 5 games. In 10 starts in 1973, quarterback Dan Pastorini lost all 10, throwing just 5 touchdown passes to 17 interceptions. It led Pastorini to wonder if he was playing the right sport, as he had been offered a baseball contract by the New York Mets before being drafted by the Oilers in the 1971 NFL Draft. Fortunately for Pastorini and the rest of the Oilers, their future began to change almost immediately. After starting 1-5 in 1974, they finished the year winning 6 of 8 for an even record of 7-7. In 1975, Houston finished 10-4, but missed the playoffs. This was because they lost both of their games against division rivals Pittsburgh and Cincinnati. The Steelers finished 12-2 on their way to winning the Super Bowl, and the Bengals went 11-3 to take the AFC's only wildcard spot. 0-4 against the Steelers and Bengals in 1975, but 10-0 against the rest of the NFL. A perfect summation of life as a fan of the Houston Oilers. Thanks for joining me for this trip into the football attic, and I hope I'll see you again next week. In the meantime, check out all the other great podcasts here on the Sports History Network, and follow me on Twitter at JFG Sports. I always love to talk football and its history. For now, this is John Gidley.
This podcast is part of the Sports History Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sport. You can learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com.
We at the Sports History Network are thrilled to work with our sponsors and partners. With their support, we are able to produce great content for you. The other cool thing is most of our sponsors and partners offer discounts to pass along to our fans. So if you go to the sportshistorynetwork.com/sponsors page, you'll find Row 1, Royal Retros, Play Classic, Thrive Fantasy, and Mega Seats. All of these offer great discounts. Specifically at Row 1, you can save 15% at the Row 1 Gallery with the code SHN. The Row 1 Gallery includes over 5,200 reproduced sports history prints on a variety of sizes of wood, metal, canvas, acrylic, or poster paper. The Row 1 shop also has thousands of more unique items with retro and historical designs dating back to 1876, including t-shirts and long-sleeve shirts, phone cases and mugs, blankets and pillows, towels, and even shower curtains. With Royal Retros, they're the king of throwbacks. They've got jerseys, shirts, hats, collectibles, and more from defunct leagues and other teams in those leagues. From Play Classic Games, it's sports simulation board games. Just use the code SHN for 10% off your first order. From Thrive Fantasy, it's a daily fantasy sports and esports app for player props. Use the promo code SHN for instant 100% match up to $100. And with Mega Seats, they're tickets with no fees. You can save up to 10% with the code SHN. So check them out on the sportshistorynetwork.com sponsors page. That's sportshistorynetwork.com/sponsors. The soundtrack is provided by Kevin MacLeod of filmmusic.io.